Hey y'all, this is Sam with the Roots of Change podcast, and I'm super excited to have Janiah Miller on to talk about the intersection of disability justice and housing rights. Welcome, Janiah.
Yes, thank you. I'm excited to be on today.
I'm very excited to have you to really dig into this issue because I think the intersection. It's very complex, but it's one that is incredibly important right now and one that we're not seeing a lot of coverage in the press, and a lot of political leaders are not touching on this. So I really appreciate your work on this. So Janiah Miller is a Black feminist organizer with experience in cross movement organizing, campaign management, and political strategy. What I love, you started your career in Cincinnati City Hall. You took on police accountability reform, as well as fighting for affordable housing through legal actions against exploitative landlords, and you elevated political awareness on housing justice. You've continued that in your various lines of work, and so I would really love to just get into why is housing justice and accessibility an urgent and intertwined issue right now for you personally, but also just nationally and globally?
Yes, for me personally, my grandmother, she grew up in the Newport housing projects for 45 years. She was also often referenced as the longest term tenant there. And so when I think about her experiences and the experiences of the folks that I grew up with, I began to realize how housing justice really intersects with everything because it's fundamental in your life. It's just not about having a home, it also is a home to rest your head. It's also about access to good schools, grocery stores, parks, and so forth. And so when we think about disability justice, specifically accessibility, those go hand in hand, right? Because everybody should have that as a basic right. Because if you don't have, your wheelchair ramp or elevator in your building or the necessary accommodations in your apartment, it can make your life feel unstable. And I oftentimes think accessibility is viewed as something that is treated like an add on. But for many Black women, caregivers, and disabled people, accessibility is really the difference between survival and instability.
Absolutely. And I think the piece that you're touching on too is it's a psychological issue.
Mm.
Like not having that housing and that security is something that you have to carry throughout your entire day. So if you're someone who is already struggling financially, that is that extra effort that we don't talk about in our society, and we don't really have that societal support from a financial or just community perspective.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's a good point. Because, like, if you don't know how you're going to pay your light bill because, your Georgia Power has hiked up the rent, or not the rent, the bill at the end of the month, then that's something that you're going to be worried about and constantly thinking about.
Absolutely. And we've seen that crisis really accelerate in the last 5 years, but obviously it's been kind of building in the last few decades. But with the mass disabling event of COVID-19, which we are still in, um, and at the same time, we're also experiencing one of the worst economic crises in U.S. history. We're seeing that the majority of our nation's wealth is at the top, and the folks that are being left behind don't have affordable housing, don't have just the basic necessities. So I know this is a bit big question, but can you kind of briefly put us into perspective of how did we get here, and what are the um, kind of the areas that we should understand about these intersections?
Yeah, I think in a nutshell, systemic racism is what got us here. I don't think people, a mass disabling event or a housing crisis, those are all government made problems, not people made problems. But the way that it's pushed and portrayed is that, oh, people are trying to take a handout or people aren't actually caring for themselves. But that's actually not at all true. And so when you think about, being disabled and Black women and girls and gender expansive people being the backbone of the care economy, then that also impacts people's health and trajectory as well. So if if 300,000 white men had lost their job, we would be in a recession right now. And so I think that's something that's also not being talked about in the media, is that we are actively in a recession that is impacting women, especially ones from marginalized communities, the most, because of the job loss, because of how this current administration is targeting specific jobs of groups of people that voted against them. Some might think that's like a reach, but I do think those things are interconnected in this moment.
The systemic nature is something that we really need to talk about. And I think, 2026, we are in Trump's America.
Hmm.
Like, we have reached a point where the systemic oppression of white supremacy has turned its head around to the United States and to most of its citizens. And like, we've seen that this administration has explicitly targeted Black women. They've also explicitly targeted disabled people. There is like this mass narrative to try to, silence those voices and do that economically as well. And I would love to kind of like talk a little bit about that intersection, particularly around, poverty and disability. We don't really talk about that. And so many folks just kind of go about their day assuming that people are being taken care of, when in reality, our systems are failing so many folks.
People, I think, will have certain ideas about what does it mean to be disabled, right? When the majority of people often are neurodivergent. So a lot of people, if you have anxiety or some sort of depression, that's actually being neurodivergent. And so when we think about that, and how you think about different caricatures, for example, with Black women, like, being sassy, ghetto, these things like that, or how if you're quiet, then you might be assumed to have an attitude and so forth. When really someone might just be anxious, they might be experiencing depression. And so throughout history, like, our pain has been erased, and you see that in the medical field, and how there's this perception that we don't experience pain in the same way, whether that's physical or mental. And so I think that's how that also shows up. And that is why you see Black women experience the superwoman schema more, or they might experience be high functioning with depression. It might not look like curling up in your bed, but actually having to still move through the day because you have to take care of your family. You have to take care of yourself. You really have to keep going. And so I feel like that is how, like, systems are failing us, when we're not even addressing basic needs around accessibility, whether it's putting subtitles on a screen at your job, in a meeting, and so forth. And so I think those are really important things to think about, that accessibility shouldn't just be about compliance. It should also be about dignity, rest, and really building a world where our bodies and needs and our communities are held in care.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's like it's putting the human first, and it's understanding that like we all have a lot of similarities, but we also have a lot of differences in like our experiences and who we are and how we take on the world. um, I really appreciate the expanded definition of disability, because I think that's something that a lot of people are missing. I myself would fall into the disability community, and that has been my own kind of journey to be able to like name that for myself. But then when we think about the systems as well, we're also talking about that, like, this isn't individualized. This is something that Black women and other marginalized communities have to carry every single day. So it's not one person's fault for having depression or anxiety. It is the act of having to like live in a world that's not built for you, and to still continue to survive and to hopefully thrive as well.
Yeah, that's so real. That's really what I like to think about my work, my life's work, is how can we thrive? How do we build a society where people can thrive? Because we, it's not just about can I pay my rent, my car note, get some gas, those types of things, but it's like actually like can I do things beyond that, right? Like you shouldn't. I saw a post one day where it was like people really feel bad for ordering food, like or getting DoorDash. Like maybe I'm being financially irresponsible or something, but it's like no, you deserve to order a nice meal from time to time or have your hair done. Those things are important, and I think in society, we really underscore the need for joyful connection to really connect in that way so we can thrive, right? And so I also think that's a piece that's missing too within our everyday needs because we're so deeply seeped in like how do we survive? We actually don't get to thrive. So I guess for me, it's survival to thriving and building a culture around.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I want to get a little bit into kind of organizing and activism because to me that feels like an arena that like can allow for that, can allow for the thriving and the care and like, the idea is we are trying to build the future. If we want to build a liberatory future, we should be taking those steps today. We should be living that life so that that reality can come into fruition in the future. Um, and yet, I see a lot of organizing spaces not being accessible, not supporting the disability community. Can you talk a little bit about that and just ways that you've seen um, that have been inclusive, that have felt, better and had that kind of thriving element in it?
Yeah. Yes, I think like when you think what who is your work speaking to? How does your work speak to everyone? Like say for example housing, right? And so you should use a disability framework within that. Like it shouldn't be like a housing program or policy that's just focused on disabled people. Like whatever you're presenting should incorporate that. Just like I would say for like LGBTQ, like that lens should be applied across the board rather than viewing them as like separate issues. So, meaning like not viewing things as a disabled issue or an LGBTQ issue, but that framework actually being embedded in real time. And so, when I think about the work, I try to encompass that. Like, does that speak to the people on the margins, right? Like, you can, be in a marginalized community, but that doesn't mean you're the one who's experiencing the greatest impact, right? And so it's calling in those voices and making sure they're at the center, and then also making sure whatever you're presenting, whether it's speaking, programming, campaign, or so forth, it already incorporates that. And so I've seen some places do that really well, where that's like really embedded into like the framework. What does that mean? What does care mean as a politic, right? Those types of things versus just like separating them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think about I'm thinking about this book that I read called Transgender Marxism.
Mm,
And it was like a very deep textbook, so wade in with caution. But it essentially like there's a lot of other books like that. There's like Black Marxism and others that are similar that are saying like focus if you focus on the most marginalized, then that trickle down, that's the trickle down. It's not trickle down economics and giving
yeah,
wealthy people. Like the trickle down is focusing on the most marginalized, and then everyone wins, everyone gets taken care of. Because if we are understanding the varying needs of, the disabled community, for example, then we are supporting everyone. I think about like the curb cut effect as well. If we carve a like a ramp into the sidewalk, that's helpful for folks who are in wheelchairs, but it's also helpful for moms who
right.
have like that is helping everyone. So yeah, I appreciate that, and I would also love to kind of talk a little bit about messaging and how organizations, activists can do a better job of making sure that the disabled community is included and that that is like known. I think sometimes it's like, well, we are including them, and it's like a little, note at the bottom. So, un- yeah, would love to hear about kind of messaging best practices.
So I really think it's also trying to figure out ways not to lean in solely to trauma, right? But also trying to connect through care, survival, and like collective liberation. Like, what is the collective messaging that we're trying to share and push forward as a group? I'm really big on participatory work. So, whether there's like a focus group or someone, like who in your community, like, are you actually drawing from to create those messages that will actually like resonate in real time, that can be put on like social media or multimedia platforms? Because I do think like those stories are not being shared. Like, it's a specific idea of someone who is disabled versus somebody who might not visibly appear to be disabled but could have disabilities. So it's like, how do you intertwine that and show in real time, what does that look like in your day-to-day life? Like, what goes on in the back of someone's mind, really, and really just like making the connection point around wanting to build together, because I think it's about collective responsibility. And we've lost like the art of that, like the know your neighbor type of thing, like, being able to ask someone, can you watch my kid for 30 minutes, or can I borrow a stick of butter? And so I think that's the important messaging piece, is like, it's about knowing your neighbor. Like, how do you build community with one another? Because disability can happen to like anybody at any age, and it's okay. It's not a hindrance. You just learn to live with it. But we should be creating like a culture around that and thinking about that. Like, I just watched a documentary, for example, around cancer and so forth. And it's like, what if we actually had a society that thought about, okay, how do we make more space for folks who do have ailing disabilities or things of that nature, without separating it, without someone feeling like they have to go through something completely alone? And so I think the messaging is really making about, it's not just about accommodations, it's how we care for each other, and so forth. And I guess being self determining too. I think the self determining piece is big as well.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I also like, I love the kind of give and take that you're sharing, because I think a lot of organizations and activists right now are feeling like it's all on their shoulders. And especially in white spaces, you
Yeah.
see this like, I'm going to carry this all. I can't ask anyone else for something. And it's like, well, actually, if you ask you, like you said, you get the community voices involved, then they're more likely to show up. They're more likely to become like ambassadors for your organizing. um, Having that give and take. Like, I think about, dinner parties, and like I'm Latino, you're Black, going to the cookout, going to different like organizing spaces. Like, there is so much community and vibrancy in those spaces. And then you go to dinners with white folks, and the wife is like, no, I can't, don't help me, don't worry, I'll do the dishes, I'll do everything. And it's like, why don't we all just participate, and then we have that vibrancy, we build that community, and it doesn't have to be on your shoulders.
Yeah, that's a really great like point about the difference in cultural experiences, and that's something that I'm trying to return to this year. That I've often talked with friends and coworkers about. Is since like 2020, the global pandemic, like we've lost the art of like hosting and being in community with one another. I think things are actually within the last 2 years just starting to even pick back up socially, like from like an external standpoint, like you being outside of your house. But oftentimes, I think in these spaces, you'll go to the same events, see the same people, but y'all aren't actually like deepening with each other. Y'all have shared interests, like say if we're Black or we're queer, Latin, like we're all in some sort of struggle within the world that is not really built or designed for us. So how do we scale it back a bit, like what you're saying, and think about like have a dinner party, have a gathering. So that's something that is a personal commitment this year for me. I'm new to the city of Atlanta. I just moved here within the last year. My first time living away from home, and so something that I'm trying to do is host like community gatherings at my apartment, like once a month, like a community night, and do something that's affordable that people can see, that's replicable in real time. Like, a pound of ground turkey is like $10. A pepper is like $1. An onion is two. And like you can make that, and people are like, oh my God, and you can convene over a meal, like things are light, including activities like that's like an icebreaker with people, and just start inviting folks. Like I had a gathering last month, the first one last month in my apartment, and afterwards people began to want to host their own gatherings, or they were like, oh my God, you have this great circle. And I was like, you know what, girl, like a lot of those people that came are budding friendships. Like, but you would think that we were very, very close. And folks were like, yeah, I really needed this space. I think we're losing that. Like, we're forgetting we just need a space on a random Wednesday night to like kick it, listen to some music, maybe play a game, do a vision board activity, and eat some food or whatever. And so I think that should be a personal commitment for folks. Like, how do you convene people, even if it's two people? 10 people might come one month, the next month it might be three, but you're still holding that space for folks to build that rapport with one another.
Wish I was in Atlanta.
Yeah.
um, that's so fun, and it's such a good example of like something concrete that people can do. I know so many folks who are just like, what do I do? What do I do? And it's like, we'll get back into the housing justice conversation, but it feels too big. It feels too big to tackle. Like housing is so intrinsically tied to our economic issues. And so it's like these are larger systemic issues, but that step is the connection, it is the community. Um, we're recording this in Black History Month, which feels very weird this year, given Trump. But I think about, the Black Panther Party here in Oakland. They were cooking meals. They would cook breakfast. They would make sure that the community was taken care of. And like food for me, for Latinos especially, is like food is care, food is love. And that is such an important piece that goes so much farther than I think people even realize, because we've been conditioned out of it, because we've had, COVID-19 and all of those varying pieces.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think those survival programs are really what's needed right now. I'm a firm believer in mutual aid. I personally believe we should shift away from capitalism, and it should ultimately be dismantled, and we should have a solidarity economy. So, what that looks like, is that traditional mom and pop, or it's mom and pop shops, or it's starting a community fridge, or it's providing like a meal. People used to do rent parties and so forth. And so I think the more we build structures that don't rely on governmental institutions that are leaving us behind, I think is really important, because again, there's that narrative around welfare and so forth. But it's like, we pay more taxes than Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, some of the wealthiest people in the world, the wealthiest people, right? But you might not even make six figures, but you're spending $30,000 on taxes that are going towards things like endless wars, but not actually programs that are going to help benefit communities. And so I would say to folks, like, the government owes us everything, but even in that sense, if they're not giving us that, how do we actually again create sustainable systems for one another that's built neighborhood by neighborhood, and then can have a trickle up effect, right? Because like you said, this isn't like trickle down economics. Like, really, things go upward, not downward. And so how do we build those systems and networks in our communities to scale, so we again don't have to rely on those institutions? But I do love the Black Panther example, because I was actually reading an article last week about that program, and they talked about how they used food as an organizing tactic, and then they went into neighborhoods and was like, hey, this grocery store don't believe you should have free food. And so we can organize around that, because right now I'm in the process, through some of the work I'm doing, in launching a community fridge. So I think those intersections between food, housing, care, all connect to each other.
Yeah, definitely. food is something that I think about a lot. I haven't like publicly announced it yet, but I have been quietly starting a vegan sustainable food and catering business.
Mm.
And the idea is around that solidarity economy. It's like, um, I've got community member meals. And so for folks who do have the means, they can buy their food and then they can add a community meal. And then that goes to, the indigenous and other folks who are experiencing housing insecurity in the city. Um, and it goes to the unhoused populations who, especially in San Francisco, but all across this country, are not being taken care of, and are actually being criminalized. Um, I wanted to briefly talk about kind of that solidarity economy and like, what we're touching on a little bit is like the dance between privilege and being marginalized. And I think a lot of privileged folks have been conditioned to not look towards marginalized communities as places to learn from, places to grow into. What you're sharing, like these are all examples that we can all take in. So I would love to kind of talk a little bit about um, a little bit more of like the concrete ways, like how do we start to do the solidarity economy? Like what are the little steps so that people feel like it's not like completely overwhelming?
Yeah, for sure. I think you and I have been mentioning some of those steps. And so I think it can start with simply something like a community fridge, for example, or a meal program that you're referencing. You just have to, find a location, connect with your neighbors, get the structure, donations. Typically, you can get funding through different neighborhood planning units and committees. Even cities sometimes have funding in small local grants. But I guess on a smaller scale, one thing that I'm also thinking about is like, how in my apartment or in more urban settings can you grow your own food? Right? Like I have a balcony. Now there's like, I think it's like hypertonic, like type of tanks or I don't know if it's a tank, but it's really just like a structure where you can like grow food on like a stand. So I'm thinking about that. Like, what would it be like if I've never grown food or I've only maintained a plant, honestly, to actually grow some like strawberries on my balcony or to actually grow like some lettuce or something like that. And then from there, build up. And so I think it could really just simply start with those initial seeds and then can build up. But again, if you have more capacity, like the program you described around the vegan meal prep or like a community fridge, and then from there, other people can be mobilized. Like I always like to come up with what's an educational resource too, like a zine, like a small booklet that explains the how. And then figure out how to be able to disseminate that or put something online to show and then connect that to like a call to action. And then from there, other people will likely join. Like I recently talked to somebody in like Fort Wright, Texas, I believe, who had like 5 to 8 community fridges and they just did this on their own outside of their job. And like people began to just like connect with them, like, hey, we see this model is working. I want to put one in my neighborhood. Let's do it. And so when we build synergy around work that's already happening and connect those dots, then I think that's how we build toward that broader solidarity economy. And then after a few years, it can be like, okay, how can we scale this if that's the work that you want to do? But I think your individual contribution and just trying to grow grow your own food, disconnect from consumerism, like, if you get a hole in your shirt, maybe try to learn to sew, like those types of things to where we're not just leaning again so much into capitalism, like and so forth, because that also has impact on the environment.
And it's building back our agency. It's like
Yeah.
taking our agency back from capitalism. And I will say I've been quietly growing carrots and green scallions in my house, but we'll see. I feel like my carrot is going to be very small, but it's still like really joyful to get to like see and watch the entire process from the seed. And you're like watering dirt and you're like, is this going to what's going to happen here, and then all of a sudden there's a sprout, and like that's just it's so rewarding to get to experience that.
Yeah,
Same thing like sewing your shirt and such.
definitely.
I wanted to kind of go back to the housing justice issues and really talk a little bit more about kind of the concrete work that you've done, and to understand like what are the varying accessibility issues that people can be aware of within housing, both like in the urban as well as in rural areas.
Back in Cincinnati, we did a lot of work around the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. That was an initiative that the Greater Cincinnati Homeless Coalition really helped steward back in 2018. And so there was some initial funding that was put in there. They really tried to hit on like the 30 to 60% of the area median income, which essentially is how much money, what is the average money or a salary, I guess you could say, in that area. And so then that's what they base the affordable housing off of. And so, really, if folks were to think about how do I remember AMI, it's really thinking about someone who might make under $100,000 and if that's affordable. And really, that 30 to 60 are people who might make in between, 0 to like 50K, and making sure that the rates for your rent and so forth are able to match that, so you're not cost burden. So cost burden is when you spend 30% or more of your paycheck on rent. That's how you know that it's not affordable, right? And so it's important to stay within that bubble, right? Because we're talking about just not just surviving, but thriving. And so through that work, they got that passed to establish it. And then we did a ballot measure. Unfortunately, that ballot measure wasn't successful, but it created like a lot of momentum in the community because it was going to put 50 to $100 million annually to fill the 20 to 30,000 unit deficit, which would take like I think over 20 years or so at least to fill. And so from there, what we did, I was able to lead and manage a people power committee where we talked about how do we keep housing as a key issue, because the executive director in that role, he had been in that position for like 25 years, and he told me like, that there's never been a time where there has been local discourse from elected officials about housing in the way that there is now. And so through this committee, we released Cincinnati's first housing justice voter empowerment guide, where we asked candidates on both sides of the political spectrum questions that were based on that they were informed by tenants in the community. So that's one way you can build momentum. Well, actually, a few through policy advocacy, that local ordinance, then campaigning that affordable housing trust fund ballot measure, and then civically through actually having a committee that's steering what the electoral discourse is, how to engage people. Other ways is directly through tenant advocacy. We would go to different buildings if people were getting displaced. We would work with tenants to write demand letters, or if there were pieces that their landlord weren't like fixing, whether it was maintenance, using a grill, we would do that. And then we would move to do like rallies and testimony at City Hall, which would then build up momentum and generate that earned media. And so that actually in one specific case is really what led to the city of Cincinnati really looking into an investigation around a group that was around an out-of-state investor that was providing housing in the community. And so they were actually like slumlords. They weren't keeping up with things. And so through that continued advocacy and trying to make the right connection points with folks, it's really important, because what I was able to do, having had some experience working in government and in organizing spaces, I was able to bridge like communication gaps with people. And so when people were in the buildings, I was pointing out specific things that they might not be aware of, or they might not be thinking of, in terms of like, do you see that? That looks like mold, or this or that. And then so they were able to really actualize, no, like these tenants are not being, they're not being treated well.
I appreciate the full spectrum, because I think what I notice in like a lot of local governments is just like different people not talking to each other. Like the
Mm-hmm.
groups aren't really organized, and they're not really meant to, right? Like a lot of this is built on structures that still are white supremacist. They still have a lot of that redlining embedded in the legislature. And so I appreciate like a lot of the community outreach, I think is so crucial because there are programs that people don't know about, or just, that constant, just making sure that people know what their government is doing for them.
Yeah, for sure.
So while we're talking, I can't help but thinking about, Afrofuturist Octavia Butler and her book, The Parable of the Sower, which takes place is actually in 2025, and it showcases a lot of the conditions that we're experiencing now: houselessness, mass poverty, and a lot of elites in the government that are not taking care of us. I would love to hear from you kind of what is important about Octavia's story and why do we tell our own stories?
Yeah, definitely. I think storytelling in general is just so, so key, right? Because oftentimes victors in history write the story, but that doesn't show the full picture, right? And so I often speak in stories where I like to share like an example or an anecdote to really provide resonance around that. And so when I think about something like the parable of the sower, I think like Afrofuturism helps us recognize like the present and just not imagine the future, because we have to imagine a future where Black and brown people are here, where queer people are here, where trans people are here, right? And so if we're not thinking about the future and we're only thinking in the moment, then what will we have, right? And so I think thinking about that, and just even someone like Bell Hooks in her book All About Love, like, you know, we're I think she mentions like we can get all these policy victories. Okay, say we got every single policy victory we need to get to liberation, but people haven't been cared for in the process. People's mental health is bad. What is that going to replicate? It's going to replicate the same systems of harm, right? And so really that storytelling is what builds like political consciousness, and it helps people see systems, not just individual struggles. And so it really shows how like inequality compounds over time. That's what makes it systemic, is that the system is stronger. That's why we have more people segregated today than we did in 1955 when the Civil Rights Act was written, because guess what took form? Redlining, which divided up the cities. And so, right, but what if we had imagined a future where we had tried to stop redlining, or we actually, scaled up here, did that. And so I think ultimately stories like that help us move from thinking something as a personal failure, but to recognizing as a systemic issue.
Yeah, we have to dream the future world and also tell the stories of the present so that we can act. The last month, there was an announcement in the Twin Cities, that organizers are ready for a rent moratorium. They're going on. They've already committed like 26,000 people, I believe, to, yeah, 26,000 workers have pledged to withhold rent, which they are saying they could start as of March 1st. So I'd love to kind of get your reaction to some of these measures that are a little bit more like extreme, but meeting the moment, meeting the extreme moment that we find ourselves in. Like, what is like how what is your reaction to the rent moratorium?
Yeah, I think that's a great action, to be honest, because a lot of these landlords are not really providing like housing in a way that meets the needs of people. It is very like transactional, and I do think that there needs to be more landlord accountability around the experience and so forth. And so I think those actions are more grounded, because I think that while in the US they might seem radical, or not something that should be happening or reach, in other countries, predominantly white countries, like your Finlands, your Norway, Switzerlands and stuff, even I think Greenland too, like see these guarantees. Like you don't see houseless people because like housing is a guarantee there. And so I think when we start thinking about what is a guarantee, what are we owed, like what is our right, okay? And so I think that's really amazing that they were able to mass mobilize all of those people, because it can be hard even collecting a few hundred pledges. Like, I've been, I've collected like pledges, like, vote like a Black feminist. We got 500 pledges here, then we moved to 800 the next year. And so things like that can actually be hard. And so I can only imagine the deep level of organizing and commitment it took to get that level of people to even scale up in that way. And so I think those are actions that we should be taking across the country, that we should be demanding, because these corporations are taking so much. And again, when we go back to our housing issues, are a government made problem, not a people made one. I think the people have to take that power back. And I do think when we think about solidarity economies, I think, cooperativism, community land trust, rent stabilization, and just overall collective ownership are really important pieces, right? I do believe that cooperativism is really the way of the future. It should be, before things completely collapse.
Yeah. And I think right now we're seeing that kind of push and pull between the old and the new is
Yeah.
like the fact that we have 26,000 workers pledging. Like, you're right, that is a wild number. And it's in just the Twin Cities, you know? Um, that shows that there is momentum, that people do want collectivism, they do want a better world. And a lot of what we're experiencing now is just elite capture, elites trying to hold on as desperately as possible. But I see a lot of like hope in that like there is energy, there is better understanding, better education about the housing issues
Yeah.
today.
Because Kansas City Tenants have been doing that work for years. That's an organization that I've been following for some time now, and just how they think about. I think they have like a homes guarantee like booklet with people's action or something, where they kind of talk about that work to build up the tenant power. And they really went neighborhood by neighborhood, door by door, and made the right connections. And so I think in general, Kansas is like a model for what possibility could look like if you scale up in a very grassroots way that's not like superficial or like kind of like, celebrity organizing type of thing. Like, no, like real boots on the ground. Like, let's ask people some questions. Like, let's develop a survey and then let's scale up from there, which is really hard. So I know they had a citywide tenant union too. So I think that's also another alternative. But I know that that also again takes a lot of capacity to sustain something like that.
We will definitely link that in the show notes so people can check out their work. And yeah, that's super crucial. I do also want to touch on, as we start kind of wrapping up, you talked about, our rights and what we deserve as people. And one of the things that we deserve is also care. And we're not getting that. You mentioned, this continual push to keep people in extreme situations, to have to go paycheck to paycheck and have to continue to work and work and work and not have that opening for care. So I'd love to hear from you, what are you doing for your care? And also, like, what are ways for all of us to care in this moment, both collectively and individually?
Yes, that's such an amazing question. What am I doing in this moment for care? So earlier I mentioned the community gatherings. That's a piece of that for me. Sometimes, I always tell people like I feel very recharged being in community with people. Like, yes, I love my alone, introverted time. Like get into the TV shows. That's another thing. I really like TV shows too. So it's like I'm into it in the moment. But I also like to lately I've been really into fitness. So I have like a personal trainer. And even without that, I would try to still be a part of like gym culture, because it's really nice to be around other people, like minded people. especially like in a black owned gym where that's the majority of the people there. And so we're all like trying to do something with our health, even if we're like, like I got to do this burpee. So it's kind of being able to get back into your body, right? Find that community because you meet friends, you meet connection with people. Y'all are challenging each other, like you're building and you're growing strength. I think oftentimes, especially for women, there's this idea that growing like muscles or strength is like more masculine when really it can be just as like feminine and so forth as well. So I think that's really important. Like, how do you take care of your body, show up for that? Because there are days I'm like, I don't want to go to that gym, but I do go. And then I had a completely bad day. And now I can't even remember what that bad day was about. But I remember that moment where I went to the gym and I just like laughed with some random people I don't know for real. And it made me feel like life is going to be okay. I also like to do like daily walks, like going on walks and stuff. So I really value walkable neighborhoods if you have one. I also like self care things, like more traditional things, like, of course, like hair, stuff like that. Like, how do you maintain yourself? Those types of things. But I also try to make space for joyful connection too. Like, I go to like a park and I get on a swing or something. And so people often like smile at me because it's like, wow, like I'm a full adult now. Like, adults really don't do that. So like figuring out ways to connect to your like childlike wonder or whatever. Because every time I go in the air, I just remember being at the 6th Street Park when I was in middle or elementary school. That park is no longer there, and it brings me like the sense of like peace. So I like that. And then things like journaling, reading, even therapy. I think people think like you have to be crazy to go to therapy, but no, it's really about like how do I show up better for myself and feel better internally so I can lead a more vibrant life, one that feels like I'm able to thrive and move through things in a very like principled way. I think those are a lot of different things, but I think really the advice I would give to people: find your outlet. Even if you're someone who doesn't like to be around people, be around people. As human beings, we need to be around people. We need to talk. We need to find connectivity. So whether it's, like a gym class or something, do that. Even finding a local coffee shop, those baristas will remember you, remember your name. And it's like, oh, you remember me. Like, just find space for those little moments. It does not have to be big, big moments for yourself that bring you like connection. And so that's how I think we should be showing up for ourselves so we can show up better for one another because our liberation first has to start internally.
Those are some amazing ideas. So I hope that our listeners are going to actually go out and get on those swings. I, for one, do swing on my local swings, and it's really joyful because we have so many birds around, and so I'm just like I'm with the birds. And I also wanted to touch on the community aspect because that's been a piece for me too. We're talking about disability justice, and COVID-19 was a mass disabling event. We all had to adjust and figure out how we wanted to move in this world.
Hmm.
And I'm someone that masks indoors, but I've found that being in community is so important for me, and that you do have to do that little step. Like if you're grumpy and you're like, I don't want to do it, and you just push that one time, like you will find those connections and you will feel better. And if you don't, then that is good information too. It just might not be the space for you. You might need to find somewhere where you do feel seen and safer.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate that. As we wrap up, just thank you. Thank you
Yeah.
so
Thank
much
you.
for this conversation. We've really woven throughout the conversation, and I just appreciate all of the intersectionalities of it and the systemic thinking. Um, is there anything that you kind of want to share as we wrap up? And then is there anything that you want to promote as we wrap?
Yes, thank you so much for the opportunity. It was really great being able to talk to you today. Yeah, so I would really just wrap up with saying housing is a human right, care is too, and that everyone deserves to thrive within their life, and that can look different in so many ways. But you don't deserve to only survive or scrape by just because. And so, in that we're inherently valuable, especially us as Black women, girls, or gender expansive people living in a world that's constantly telling you that you're not valuable, we're still rising, right? Because, like you said earlier, like folks like Octavia Butler, Black feminist theorists and writers had predicted this moment in time, right? And so, leaning on different theories and lenses like that is really important. And so, in terms of anything I want to promote, not at this moment. Personally, I'm in progress of getting a personal website, but in the future, I'll have some more things that are centralized to promote. But I really appreciate the offering, though.
We will definitely promote it when it's ready, and we would love to amplify that across our media. Yeah, and I will say we covered a lot of housing issues in the past, and we have covered that mass segregation that we're experiencing now. So I will link that in the show notes. But yeah, I just super thank you for being here, Janiah, and I hope with that everyone stays rooted.
Thank you. This was great.